Armada, Michigan. Population 1,730. 98% white. This is my hometown. I seemed to have a decent life growing up, but upon entering the larger context of society and entering college, I was completely unprepared to successfully participate in a global society. I have always been an inquisitive person and open to new ideas, but I struggled with my naive upbringing and had a hard time discussing the issues of racism that occur in our country. I've had some opportunity to travel the world, which opened up my eyes to the social problems that we face, but I still did not know how to talk about them. In the past few months, I've learned how to not feel guilty or shy away from hard discussions of race, and I've been more open to communicate with others, especially family, friends, and my students, about the issues that are prevalent in our society. The term white fragility is a relatively new term used today to mean that white people in North America live in a social environment that protects and insulates them from race-based stress. It was a term used by Robin DiAngelo in her article by the same title written in 2011. This is not to say that the idea of white fragility was not in existence before, it was simply given a name only recently. This idea is something that goes hand in hand with colorblind racism, which is a way of ignoring racial differences. This is all stemmed from past systemic issues of segregated neighborhoods and white flight that persist today. White students continue to enter higher education having had minimal exposure beyond white neighborhoods and spaces. As a result, they are likely limited in their ability to perceive racial bias towards people of color and tend to demonstrate racial apathy. As stated before, white fragility is an insulated environment of racial protection that builds white expectations for racial discomfort while at the same time lowering the ability to tolerate racial stress. In other words, it means that white people have the ability, because of their dominant social status, to separate themselves from discussing issues of race or even completely avoid interacting with people who are different from themselves. There are many reactions that occur because of white fragility, such as feelings of anger, fear, or guilt. Some possible actions that may take place can include argumentation, silence, or leaving the situation altogether. Since white people have isolated themselves, they do not have the ability or racial stamina to overcome any form of racial discomfort. Instead of stating that they feel uncomfortable in a situation, they often deem that they feel as though they are in danger. These thoughts and actions further support the issues of segregation and colorblind racism. This theory is something that I subscribed to for most of my life. In my hometown, I didn't have any access to any other points of view and was extremely sheltered from the rest of the world. I went on to college at Central Michigan University, which is a primarily white institution, and even the diversity there was more than what I was used to. As a major in Spanish in my undergraduate, I was exposed to a lot of different cultures, which made me think more about my place in the world. I studied abroad, saw more of the world, and began to see racial issues emerging in every place that I went. I wasn't sure how to address the issues I was seeing, so I spent a lot of my time volunteering and feeling guilty for being white. Skipping forward to the recent past, I knew that racism was an issue but didn't necessarily know how to address it, nor did I really want to address it because I didn't grow up in a place to gain the tools necessary to discuss race. I'm now learning how to not be scared to talk about race issues, and as a white person, the least thing I can do is use my privilege to be a little uncomfortable and talk about race issues because it's what needs to be done in order to create a more equitable world. We have to unlearn a lifetime of subtle and not so subtle social cues and behaviors. We have to become aware of how we think about people. We have to cringingly remember times we said racist things to other white people, or worse, in front of a person of color. Whatever it is, we have to face it. And it's hard, and it should be hard. We've had everything handed to us. We can't demand racial enlightenment on a silver platter, too. We have to do the work. This author goes on to mention how important it is for white people to be listeners and know when is the right time to speak up. We need to be better listeners, but we also can't expect people of color to teach us all about racism. And we can do these things without demanding cookies or pats on the back or taking credit for starting conversations. These conversations have been happening without our participation for decades. We don't get a gold star for acknowledging humanity and being decent human beings. On racial justice allies. Racial justice allies are white people who actively work against the system of oppression that maintains their power. Bringing about racial justice will occur only when white racial justice allies take action that upsets the status quo, the dominant ideology in culture maintaining racial inequality. White people can play very important roles in racial justice struggles as long as their involvement does not recreate racial oppression. Freer's conception of liberatory praxis involves analyzing a white person's development as racial allies. One must assume a more curious attitude toward their way of life. A critical attitude is characterized by one who is always questioning their own experiences, as well as the reasoning behind those experiences. This must then become a motivating force to take action. A critical consciousness is insufficient to promote social change if it is not coupled with action. Some experiences to help develop racial awareness among white people include cross-racial interactions, multicultural education, and minority experiences. Cross-racial interactions is exactly as it seems. These interactions must be sincere and authentic in nature. It is also important for students to obtain a multicultural education, whether it be coursework including a multicultural curriculum or a multicultural course. Some can also experience minority experiences from homosexuality and other experiences where they may be marginalized by the larger society. Becoming a racial justice ally is not an end to be achieved. If becoming a racial justice ally is an end met, then students who become allies can stop working on their racial selves. I am constantly working to become more educated and more understanding of the world around me. The world is always changing, which means that I will be changing as well. Vulnerability and openness are important parts of becoming a racial justice ally to overcome white fragility. Being vulnerable presumes continual openness to what one does not know or what one cannot control, even at the cost of risking discomfort. Epistemic vulnerability involves the ability to put oneself in and learn from situations in which one is the unknowing, foreign, and perhaps uncomfortable party. Without an acceptance of the genuine value of discomfort, the real necessity of immersing oneself in a situation in which one does not normally find oneself, learning does not happen. When we are vulnerable, we are more likely to be willing to learn from one another and become more understanding and empathetic. Critical hope is something that acknowledges that systemic oppression exists, and such hope entails a responsibility to challenge inscribed habits of emotional inattention and involves a willingness to exist within ambiguity and uncertainty. It offers an assurance that discomfort will be an opportunity for profound learning about not only the other but about oneself. Transforming your fragility into courageous imperfection is the beginning of a lot more joy. It's the beginning of a lot more connection, and it's the beginning of the end of racism. Critical hope isn't a blind utopian hope for change. It requires discomfort, work, and understanding to create lasting changes. The most important thing that I have learned is that feeling guilty about my privilege gets nothing accomplished. I have become more open about the fact that I still have a lot to learn about racial inequality. I have learned more about the white privilege that I have, and I can use that to fight racial inequalities. I must be reflective of my own professional practice and how I'm affecting students, as well as ensuring that I am helping to create a welcoming environment for all. As an educator, I know that I need to push white students out of their comfort zones and have honest conversations with them about race. Institutions must actively challenge white students to move beyond their comfort zones to reflect upon the role of race in their lives. We should be encouraging students to reflect upon and explore the role of whiteness in their daily lives, and explain how they can be allies as well to help create a more equitable world. It is important for me as an educator and as a human being to be genuine in my interactions so that I can be an ally and supportive of my students of color. There's a difference between being a racial justice ally and having a white savior complex. It is important for me to be reflective in my practice in that way, to ask myself, am I simply doing this for myself to make me feel better, or do I genuinely want change?